Salve a tutti, siamo collegati oggi con New York con Bill Travis e Robert Kalman. L'incontro sarà in inglese e sta per iniziare il collegamento. Ciao a tutti. Hi Bill.
Thank you, Stefano. I'm Bill Travis, and I'd like to briefly introduce myself before we get started. I was a tenured professor of art history at the University of Michigan, Dearborn for several years, and then about 20 years ago, reinvented myself as an artist. I like to think that this background gives special insight into art from dual perspectives, looking in as a scholar and looking out as a creator. I've published several books and scholarly articles and have had exhibitions in museums and galleries on 4 continents. If you're interested in learning more, please follow me on Instagram at Bill Travis Art, all one word. Now, let's get started. I'm going to pass the screen, so bear with me. Okay, wait a second. We're having technical difficulties. Robert?
Yes, Bill.
Can you put up the screen?
No, I still don't have access.
Everybody knows that there are problems on YouTube. So, apologies. Robert, I have to make you the host.
Okay, go ahead. I'm now the host. And now I have the board. Here we go. Hang on just a second, Bill. Just a second. We good?
We're good. Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome.
So let me start by introducing the series. Who doesn't know this famous image from July 20th, 1969, the American flag on the moon, symbol of the Cold War and of competition with the Soviet Union, but also and primarily a symbol of scientific achievement and of an optimistic, forward-looking society. Let's have the next slide. And here is the American flag, once again, on, in fact, a few different types of American flags, on January 6, 2021, a little closer to home, as it looked during the insurrection at the Capitol, when a president and a violent mob acting on his behalf tried to overturn an election. Same symbol, different meanings. The America we thought we knew is a different country today. When Stefano asked me to put together a panel on contemporary photography, I felt it would be interesting to ask 3 photographers to give their take on the nation. We are not offering answers, we are asking questions. Over the course of 3 months, I'll be talking with 3 American photographers, each with a radically different approach. Let's have the next slide. Richard Wilcox, who will be speaking in March, has specialized in the types of things that usually escape notice, like lane lines on city streets or scaffolding in Manhattan, which in his hands become metaphors of a city in continual movement. And the next slide, please. Larry Davis, who will speak in April, photographs interiors of houses, museums, skyscrapers, and the like, transforming them from everyday objects into small visual poems of interior states of being. And the next, please. And today, Robert Kalman, who launches the series, will be talking about an ongoing body of work, which has led him on travels across the United States, asking people of every race and political orientation what it means to be an American. It's my pleasure to introduce him. Robert Kalman has been a documentary photographer for over 40 years. His work has been presented in solo exhibitions and juried shows throughout the United States. Robert has published books on Confederate monuments, on villagers in Nicaragua, interracial couples, indigenous Panamanians, and members of the lesbian community. He is currently working on an extended portrait project about what it's like to be an American, and that is what he's going to share with us today. So please hold your questions for the end. We want to have a lively Q&A. You can also put questions in the chat. And if I could ask everybody to mute yourself, let's get started. So Robert, it's a delight to introduce you. I pass the floor to you.
Thank you so much, Bill. Lovely introduction. Hello, everybody. Good evening to some of you. Good morning to others, and good day to everybody else. I am Robert Kalman. I am absolutely delighted to be here with you today. As Bill said, I've been working on a specific project about Americans for about 6 months, and I'm going to share a bit of this body of work with you. Please bear in mind that it is a work in progress and it's not complete yet. And I'd be pleased to know what you think of it in its current format. So the title of the project is What's It Like for You to Be an American? And let's start here. This project on Americans actually took shape during the start of the pandemic in early 2020. I usually build projects around portraits of specific groups of people that I encounter on the street. But during the early days of the pandemic, there were very few people on the streets, and I had no interest in making portraits of people wearing masks. So in casting around for a project, I started to become aware of the deplorable condition of some American flags, like this one on the side of a barn that's all weather-worn and beat up. And since the Trump administration was incompetently handling the pandemic at the time, I saw the damaged flags as a metaphor for my country dying. I gave the project a working title of I Love My Country as It Dies. And I began looking for soiled, torn, and badly displayed flags to photograph. Here, let me show you some of them. And then, while we were making these photographs, early one winter afternoon, we were driving around. We drove through this village near where I live, and with my wife, Linda, with me. And I was struck by the display of flags on this one particular residential street. Now, unfortunately, I couldn't get a satisfying angle from which to make a photograph showing all these flags. So this is a particular picture as a stand-in for what I'm talking about. It's just a long array of flags in an open field in this particular photograph, but it works the same as that particular day, that winter day when we were driving along this street. And I counted. There were 28 houses on this street, and there were 17 flags in front of these houses. So I sort of like jokingly said to my wife, looks like a lot of Americans live here. And then as sort of like a throwaway line, I said, I wonder what it's like for them to be Americans. And then 3 days later, the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol happened. And that was the moment I realized that what my next project was going to be. It was time to make portraits of Americans and ask them directly to tell me what it was like to be one. So before I show you a few of the resulting portraits and what people told me and told us, I want to give you a sense of how we work. This is a photograph of my wife, Linda. I didn't take it. Somebody passing by took it, probably because she was standing next to this huge camera. This is an 8x10 view camera, and we set the camera up on a street or in a public gathering, and I scan passers-by, and depending upon the particular project I'm working on, when I'm drawn to a certain individual, I have Linda, who's also my collaborator, speak with the person to break the ice. And I do send her over first because it's, in my experience, people are a lot more comfortable when approached by a woman in the street, a strange woman rather than a strange man. And Linda shows them a portfolio of what we're doing, and she explains, here's the portfolio under her arm. And people are usually very curious about the big, old-fashioned camera. In fact, the question we get asked most often is, wow, look at that old camera. How old is it? Well, the camera itself is a modern machine. It's the design that is quite old and harkens back to the beginnings of photography in the early 1800s. So when we start to make a portrait of a person, I ask them to be to face me and the camera in a natural way, without the typical camera type behavior. All of us here today and all over the world, people have had photographs made of themselves countless times, and so I have a belief that inside all of us we have in our neurology what I call camera behavior. Someone points a camera, we tip our head, we smile, we think that's what is wanted. But that's not what I want. I usually go after a very natural look in the photographs and the portraits that I make. And what I ended up with for this particular project was a sequence of closely related images of distinctly different faces. To my way of thinking, this is a type of democracy expressed through portrait photographs. And it sort of exemplifies the motto of the United States of America, which is e pluribus unum, from many, one. And after we make the portrait, I ask the person to tell me what it's like for them to be an American. And I always listen without judging. I don't interrupt them. And when they seem to be done telling me what it's like, I ask them to extrapolate what they've said to me onto a single sheet of notebook paper, like these people are doing here. And after they've written down their thoughts, I get their contact information. Excuse me. I get them to sign a release so that I can use the photograph and publish it. And later I send them an electronic copy, and I also send them a physical print so that they have a remembrance of their time in front of my camera. So because of the way I make portraits, which is always outdoors, always in available natural light, we had to wait until the weather warmed up. So the project really began in earnest, asking people what it was like for them to be Americans, last June. And it started in a Brooklyn neighborhood. This is Dwayne Rogers. Dwayne was one of the first portraits that we made. And as you can see, Dwayne answered the question about what it's like for him to be an American by writing, "Being an American means questioning what it means to be an American." So in this first round of portraits from June to September, we made 104 portraits in New York City and New York State. In the upcoming spring of 2022, we have plans to continue the project in other parts of the country because I'm very interested in discovering what regional differences may surface, especially in the South, in the Midwest, and especially in Texas. Now I'm going to show you about 20 portraits from the project, and I'm going to take the liberty of reading out what the people have written. I will read it to you, not because I don't think all of the English speakers are able to read English, but because sometimes the handwriting is difficult to decipher, and by me reading it, we finish all at the same time. So I will also fill in some of the portraits with backstories. So this is Joe, and I met Joe at a gun show. He was very proud. He wanted to make sure that he included this cane or this cudgel in his portrait. He said that a family member had carved it out of a tree branch. He was very proud of it. But Joe said, in answer to the question about being American, "God bless America. Please bring back the Trump years. Live long and prosper." And this is Amy Wells. Amy said, "To be an American for me has been complicated due to having many liberties and an empowered sense of freedom that is constantly challenged due to my African lineage, multi-ethnic heritage, and sexuality. However, the American and African lineages in me demands more and will be manifested." This is Donald F. Weiss. I met him at a gun show also. It was a different one than the one I met Joe at. And Donald said, "I love to be an American. I grew up on a farm in Warwick, New York. Every day is hard work, but well worth it. I am an arborist and small business owner for the past 22 years now, and I couldn't imagine being anywhere else. I love my God, my family, and my guns. I wouldn't have it any other way." This is Dominic Castiglia, who I met in New York City. And Dominic said, "I love being American." Interestingly, just to go back one, that's exactly how Donald started his comment. "I love to be an American." So Dominic says, "I love being American and I love being a Democrat in this country. I've been to many cities across the globe and nothing compares, especially living in New York City's East Village. I feel alive and I am happy." And I can't, this is irresistible, so I'm going to indulge myself in showing you a close-up of Dominic. He is a very, very amiable, agreeable, sweet man with tattoos all over his face. And I just want to point out that in his lower chin, he has the word courage tattooed here. He has an AR-15 automatic weapon tattooed across the top of his chin. He has a dagger coming straight down his nose, a skull in the middle of his forehead, and a handgun pointed at the skull. Oops. Sorry. This is a woman named Pat, and Pat said, "My life is so much easier than almost anyone else's in the world now or in history because I was born white in America in mid-20th century. But as I sit here at the corner of Houston and Essex, those are two streets in New York, on the Lower East Side of New York City, two people are pulling food from a garbage can." Jeff Miles Brannon told us being American means standing for liberty, justice, love, peace for all peoples of the world. Being American means you can be anything you want to be with a little hard work. Being American means having compassion and empathy for your fellow brother or sister. Being American means taking care of our women, seniors, and children. Bo Donaldson told us he was an out-of-work stand-up comedian, and Bo offered this to answer the question. Being an American means for me, as a black man, I'm scared, and as an African American, I'm taken advantage of. We met Rick in a park at a 4th of July festival. And Rick told us, this country allows me to maintain my belief in the truth found in the Bible and continue to live my faith for now. Christianity is a counterculture philosophy. Christ is and was counter to popular culture. Following Christ and the Bible is still allowed, but becoming more antithetical to our popular philosophy. That said, I'm grateful for my freedom to live my faith. America still holds to the First Amendment. Thank God we are free to believe. And for our international audience members, his reference to the First Amendment is with regard to our Bill of Rights, which grants freedom of religion. This is a young man named Isaac who told us, it is the greatest and worst gift I've ever received. Born into a world so free, but a world filled with hate. This is Paul, and I was initially attracted to his very provocative T-shirt message, "Give Violence a Chance." We met him at a gun show as well. Excuse me. Paul said, I'm proud to be an American, but sick of seeing our freedoms disappear. Now more than ever, the power belongs to the people. And as is usual, when I finished taking his portrait and he finished writing what he wrote, I always ask my portrait subject, so what do you do for a living? And Paul said, I'm a doctor. And my wife, Linda, is a nurse. She was standing next to me, so she perked up and she said, oh, what kind of a doctor? And he said, I'm a psychiatrist. Michelle Fuji is a Japanese-American citizen. We met her, oddly enough, we met her just during the time of the anniversary of the atomic bombings in Japan during World War II. And it was on her mind as well. What Michelle told us was August is the anniversary of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. My relatives were killed in these bombings. In August especially, I grapple with what it means for me to be American, to live in the U.S., for my tax dollars to be spent on nuclear weapons. For me to be American means to struggle with this reality and to take responsibility for this reality. New York City is my home now, but also this island is the namesake of the Manhattan Project. To be American for me is to hold many truths at once. This is Lieutenant Colonel Adam Scher, whom we met at a parade on the 4th of July. He wrote, I'm proud to be an American and an Army officer. It is special and unique that our oath is to an idea and not a person, and it is an honor to continue the traditions and preserve our freedom as so many men and women have before me. I am especially thankful to those overseas who continue to sacrifice for our way of life. Democracy is not a spectator sport. This is a young 17-year-old Muslim American girl named Aisha. She's 17, and I don't photograph anyone who's under 18 without parental permission. And her mother was with her and was only too happy to allow Aisha to be photographed and participate in the project. Aisha said, "To be an American is tough. Being the daughter of an immigrant means I get to have opportunities my mother never had. But it also means compromising some of our cultural values in order to, quote, fit in, end quote. I never learned my mother's first language, or her second, or her third. I don't wear cultural clothing because I already get so many stares wearing a hijab. Being American is tough because of the diversity this country has, but it's also what makes it such an interesting place to grow up." Mark Otten, clearly proclaiming with his t-shirt, "I am American, American," told us to be American. America is still the land of opportunity. Anything is possible. Quote, "If you can dream it, you can achieve it," unquote. This is Lynn, who told us it's a constant query as to whether Americans will be brave enough to always proclaim that we are, in fact, one nation under God. Faina. Faina is Romanian by heritage. She's Romanian American. And she told us to be an American is to be told, "You're in the greatest country in the world," and struggle to pay for health care. It's to be told that everywhere else is ass backwards and violent, but seeing your own police force beat protesters. It's to know the name of Christopher Columbus's ships and not the names of the Native American tribes whose land you live on. It's to hold on to a lot of anger, frustration, and resentment towards a country that lies to itself and its people about its own history and reality, while simultaneously always holding out hope that one day the nation could manage to reckon with and live up to the ideals it claims to hold, because, quote, "anything is possible in America," end quote. And this is another youngster that her mother was with her and gave permission. Her mother is Jewish American and her dad is a Cuban American. And Sophia wrote, "Being multicultural, I realize how lucky I am to be an American and have the privilege to speak freely. Living in the United States, I have the ability to make changes to the world and shape my future however I imagine it." And just two more. This is Nikki. We met her on the same Brooklyn street that our first subject was photographed on, Dwayne. Nikki said, "For me, being an American is a loaded label. Being African American since I was born, it was always difficult to identify with that label. I can trace my family history in the South through slavery. I don't relate to being African, but that is always added to the stamp that identifies me. Being American means being afraid to take a road trip cross country." And let's end with Bruce. Bruce is a homeless Afghanistan war veteran. And Bruce said, "Being an American means everything. Freedom, work, family, God. I gave my right eye to protect this country's liberties. God bless America forever." So I appreciate your attending. I'm going to take your questions and listen to your comments in a moment. If you'd like to screenshot this, you will see, you will be able to hang on to my Instagram and website addresses, and you can see more of my work there. And now I will stop sharing. And there you all are. Hi.
Oh, thank you very much, Robert. Would you like to stay host, or do you want to pass it to me? Either way.
I will pass it to you with pleasure, Mr. Travis.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kalman.
You're very kind. I don't know how to do that, though.
Well, you click on my name under the participants, and then it gives you the prompt.
Oh, yes. Here you are.
Oh, we learn as we speak.
Okay.
Well,
and we're making all this lively banter so that will be
recorded for eternity.
Recorded for eternity, or as long as, yeah, that's one of the reasons I shoot film, because film will be around for eternity. If not in its current form, at least I can make film through 19th century procedures, but digital will not be with us forever. Sorry.
Well, I want to start by thanking you for this moving and important project. And I can't wait to check in with you later to see how it develops. As you indicated, it's an ongoing project. I want to tell everybody this is the second time I heard the presentation, because Robert and I practiced a week ago. And let me tell you, it grows on you. So I encourage everybody to see it when it's up on YouTube. It's so rich. See it again, and it's even better the second and third time. So I would like to invite you, everybody, to join in a question and answer. We've got Robert with us here today, who's willing and able, and you can send a question in the chat or raise your hand. Be sure to unmute yourself if you want to ask a question. So let's get started. David, will you start, please?
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to say I was very impressed by Robert's approach, but also the eloquence of the people that he interviewed. And one of the many questions I'd like to ask Robert is, how have your own feelings about being an American changed as a result of this project?
I'm not so sure I've thoroughly examined the effect it's had on me, because when we go out into the field, we're learning all the time about our fellow countrymen and countrywomen. I'm really concentrating on listening to the diversity of opinions. Some people's reactions and words have surprised me a great deal. Nobody really, with the exception of the first Caucasian man who said, "Bring back the Trump years," nobody really speaks in a deeply political way and posits their own political opinions in an antagonistic way. I currently struggle with being a white male American, since so much is being made of the fact that not enough acknowledgement is made of other Americans. In fact, I'll tell you one brief anecdote which really was amusing. At the 4th of July parade, there was a reporter from a Chinese language newspaper, and I'm sorry, an English language Chinese newspaper, and she was with a photographer. So they saw what I was doing. They stopped. They asked what are we doing, and we explained that we were making photographs of Americans, and we had the portfolio in front of us, and we showed her the work, and it's like she looked confused because many of the photographs in the portfolio were of African Americans. And I could see that she was, because the parade, which was in Staten Island, New York, and is very, very Caucasian area, there were no African American or black people or people of color anywhere. So she was clearly very confused. I know that I'm not answering your question very well, but those are the things that kind of crop up for me. I wouldn't say that having made these portraits, my own opinions have changed about myself. But it's always humbling to be out there listening to people give their thoughts and feelings.
Thank you. I don't want to hog your time, Robert, but it's very interesting as an observer from this side of the Atlantic to observe the American scene. And I have very mixed feelings. I mean, I have strong connections with the States. My daughter-in-law is American. She's from California. My grandson has dual nationality, and I have cousins, second cousins that live in the Midwest. But one of the things that puzzle me about Americans is this kind of belief in the American dream. And from this side of the pond, at least, it seems to me that the dream in many places is actually a nightmare because of the inequalities. And well, I could go on forever. And this feeling is reinforced by a program that I watched on last Sunday evening by a British reporter interviewing Americans and getting their opinions. And I found it frightening, quite honestly, that people could be speaking freely in a way that very, very closely mirrored the propaganda of Nazi Germany. Now, this is obviously not a broad spectrum of American society, but the insidious way that they are spreading their message really scared me for your country, because it seems to me that there are extremes of opinion that I find extremely distasteful. And at the same time, I have this great affection for your country. So it's a bit of it's not really a question about portraits or photographs or of people, it's about perception. So this is my perception of what it's like for some Americans to be American. And I think I better shut up now because I think I've probably spoken too long. But I feel quite strongly about it. I feel strongly about the direction that I see your country going in.
Yeah, that's good.
Me too.
Mm.
Thank you very much, David. You didn't speak too long. I would love to hear more. So thank you very much for the thoughtful and very articulate comments. Very worrisome days. And I think it's very valuable that we have people here today from different countries. Italy, Germany,
Israel.
Would any of the non-Americans like to comment further on this issue which has come up?
Perhaps, sorry.
Oh, I see Alexander.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but what comes across very strongly is this perception or the reality that in America, you have this freedom of speech, you can say what you like, you can do what you like, and that gives Americans a sense of possibility and of pride. What strikes me is the difference between the United States and, say, Western Europe, where the same things apply, but they are not held to as such a strong belief and a strong mindset, because I have the freedom here in the UK to say exactly what I like about our politicians and the press, whoever. And I'm sure that the same thing goes for Scandinavia, France, Germany, Italy, wherever in Europe. And I don't hear this sort of almost chest heartbeat that is very, very apparent in the message that came through from Richard's meetings, you know, with these people. I'm puzzled a bit. It's like a kind of mythology, and it's a self-propagating propaganda. I don't know. I have mixed feelings because I don't understand it.
Is that
Robert, do you have a response to that?
No, my wife just asked me a question, and I was pointing at one of my one of my relatives on the screen. I would be quick to remind everybody that our main cultural heritage in this country comes from England. Other parts of the world later, but England especially. So I guess we took many of the cultural traditions of English life and put them into practice in the colonial era in the United States. And then, of course, slavery colored, no irony is, colored our culture and made it shameful, our culture, for many, many years, and afterwards also. That's an interest I have when I photographed the Confederate monuments, and I didn't have anybody to speak to, really, but the people I did meet throughout the South have a very, very different perspective than the people I met in the North for this particular project. America is a hugely diverse country, and unlike some cultures, like Scandinavia, for example, we don't have one broad ethnic background. We are many, many backgrounds in the United States, and that's basically what I have encountered, or who I have encountered, a wide diversity of people. Unlike, you know, the reporter from the Chinese newspaper, we are not one cultural people. We are many cultures, but we've created our own American culture, and part of that is the American dream, the American arrogance that, like several of my subjects say, there's no country better than ours. Well, I'm sure some of the international people on the call would have
It's
trouble
interesting.
understanding that.
Sorry, Rob. It's interesting you should say that, because you mentioned slavery, and England was one of the worst offenders in transporting Africans to the Caribbean and to the United States. So we have a lot of shame, and there actually is quite a debate about that going on. People want to topple statues of people who did good work, but also owned hundreds of slaves. But again, I get a sense of this: we are a diverse nation. I think that is. Let me just give you an example. I do what you do. I walk up to people and I take their photographs. I happen to photograph in an area which is the most multicultural area in the UK. 140 different nationalities. We also have a huge diversity of ethnicities and backgrounds. But what we don't have is this turmoil, this antagonism, and these huge differences. I struggle.
Well, I'd like to comment on that briefly, and then I do want to pass it on to other people. So first Alexander, and then Shelley, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Just a brief comment on that. raised some very interesting points. And I'm very interested myself in the history of New York. So I've done reading on visitors to New York in the early 19th century. And it's astonishing to see that some of the comments match up with what you have observed today, David. In fact, there was a British visitor named Frances Trollope who came to America in, I think it was the 1840s or thereabouts. She's the mother of the famous novelist, Anthony Trollope. And she started off with great enthusiasm in her travels through the country, but increasingly came up against a particular brand of American patriotism, which was very close to the outside world and was very much an exceptionalist point of view. It's really interesting to see continuities over hundreds of years. And then at the same time to recognize that there are very substantial and disturbing changes taking place. So there's continuity and change. Makes me think of Metternich. I think he was the one who said after the French Revolution that when France sneezes, Europe catches a cold. And I'm very concerned that America has sneezed, and what is different here might come to haunt other places as well. But that remains to be seen. Anyway, I do want to pass the floor to Alexander, who knows the United States very well, having lived here, and then moved back to Germany. Alexander, you have the floor.
Thank you, Bill. I mean, we stayed for 3 years in the greater New York area, and I was sent by my company to the States. And living here in Germany, I think with our past, we are pretty good at struggling with national identity. And the good thing that I would just want to pass on what I see and gives me hope in the US, that it's actually before like a big catastrophe happens, that this questioning of nationality comes before. I think in the German history, there were very diverse political streams before Second World War, but to be proud of your country was not questioned without any circumstances. What are you proud of? Why are you proud? What should you be proud of? And I think it's good that I see a movement in the US to question that, and what does this nationality to you? We had an intercultural training before we came over, and the lady summed it up in a very good way. She said, just think of the US, that there are still these cells that were originally created when people came over with the ships. And the views are more extreme than in Europe, because all the extremists were shipped over in the beginning. If there were like, especially based on religion. And also that are very big discussions about things and very strong views. And I think it's good that this exists. And I think this is one of the things that made the US very strong, that this debate is going on. What was concerning when we were actually in the country is that we see that the debate is really created more and more in bubbles, is not that diverse anymore, that people within families don't talk politics anymore, that if you know it's a Trumpian, it's really I like about your work, Robert, that you mix the different views, that you don't immediately judge them, because I think as soon as you really go into an extreme division, if you don't listen to a Trumpian anymore, what he has to say and what he's concerned of and why somebody has a certain view, that's the beginning of the big catastrophe that happened, at least with us, because people were shut down to talk. Nobody was to criticize anymore. It's also what really frightens me of China. If this liberty of speech and discussing within the society is not possible anymore, then it's getting really dangerous. And what you're doing is very good to stir up conversation and different views.
Robert is nodding in assent. Unless you want to comment, Robert, we could pass on to, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. Shelley?
It's actually Kelly, but you can call me Rachel too.
Okay. Thank you. You have the floor.
Oh, okay. First of all, it's really those small, small amount of photographs and words are very evocative and very stimulating. I think it's a very successful talk in terms of, getting me really involved, and I think other people too. So first of all, I want to give that to Robert. The other thing is that struck me, and I wondered what you think, is that, and you actually alluded to that, it seems like there's a split. There are the Caucasian males, and there's everybody else. I think mostly it's the Caucasian males that are sort of very more on the extreme side, beginning with a Trump supporter, of course, but the other ones also. And mostly the other people I thought were sort of more, it was more complex for them. They perceived the reality in a more complicated way, and were much more articulate about, differences. And I just felt there was this huge split. I don't know what you think about that.
The experiences, and so I only showed you 20 portraits today, and as I mentioned, so far we've been with 100 people. Many more ideas come up when you have 100 people, but your insight is on the mark. Many of the white men that we met have this very, I don't want to say simplistic, but very traditional view of their country. It's a great country. All you need to do is work hard. In fact, several African American men also said the same thing. That startled me. I wasn't expecting that. Black women of color, were much more frustrated and angry and ambivalent about their country. The one woman who was next to last, Nikki, who said, I'm not African. I'm an American, but I'm afraid to take a trip across my own country because I'm black. And I found that many of the women of color just expressed a lot more anger and irony. The woman who started out by saying, you're told this is the greatest country in the world, but people can't pay for health care. She was very frustrated and very angry. And very ironic. She echoed the sentiment that, in America, anything is possible. And what she meant was, maybe we'll live up to the ideals we say we have. As opposed to the gentleman who said, I am an American who really believes that anything's possible. And I didn't judge it at the time, but later I thought, sure, anything's possible if you're a white man.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you for that. I think we have time for another question. This is open to any American or any American or non-American. So, any questions? Yes. Well, I've got one for Robert, and I'm just very intrigued by how you choose your subjects.
It depends on the specific project itself, the kind of people that I'm searching for. But for this, it's very hard to put into words. As we're standing on street corners for hours, and literally it's hours, and people pass by, it has to be a person whose presence affects me in some way. It's a feeling that comes up. Sometimes it's because of the shirt they may be wearing, like give violence a chance. But most of the time, it's just their sense of themselves as I observe them. And people do have a sense of themselves, whether they're consciously aware of it or not, because it comes across to me as I'm watching people pass by. Frequently, people will say, why did you choose me? And I'll look and I'll say, why wouldn't I choose you? I said, look at all the people on the street. I didn't stop any of them. I'm stopping you because you have a particular presence that I'd like to photograph, that I would like to, capture, immortalize.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, yes, Shelley, please.
Yes, just one more question to Robert. What are your plans? What are you going to do with this? How are you going to make it, available for more people to see?
Well, currently I have a working document that in book publishing is called a maquette or a dummy that I am showing to publishers to see if they might be interested. I would think that I have at least 2 or 3 more years to go before I get to all the regions in the country that I want to visit and photograph. And, I don't see this as an art exhibit as much as I do a book. So when the book comes out, everybody on this call will get notified and you'll all get a free copy.
Oh, well, I have 2 personalities, so I would like a couple. Gemini, 2 copies for Geminis. Well, I just want to make a few concluding comments. First, to thank everybody for coming and for this wonderful, really stimulating discussion that was going. As you know, Robert put up his contact information. You can see that he's very congenial and thoughtful. So after the presentation is over, feel free to reach out. I want to say on a personal note that I've known Robert for a number of years, and it's a great pleasure to count him as a friend. And my experience with Robert has been that he will take up a subject, he'll take up a project, and a few months later, that issue gets splashed all over the news in the United States. So I think he's really got his finger on the pulse of America, somebody to follow. And he's just doing such fascinating work. And I want to say also that given the subject matter, I think a lot of the comments today have been around a lot of comments have revolved around the subject matter that he's chosen. But I think it's equally apparent that the artistic approach is equally impressive. It's not just pictures. These are taken by a very accomplished photographer, and we could do an entire talk just on that. And finally, I want to say that this is part of a series on contemporary American photography. Robert very generously launched this for us. If you're available, or if you would like to invite your friends also, it's free. Our next presentation is going to be on March 18th. So same time, same channel. We'll send you the link. If you're interested, please write me or VA Culture or Robert Kalman. My address is billtravisphoto@gmail.com. And Robert's is up on it was on the screen a moment ago. You're all invited March 18th when Richard Wilcox, another New York photographer, is going to be talking about the physical city and his approaches to photographing it as metaphors for movement and development. So that's on March 18th. Hope to see you all back then. And thanks to all of you for coming, especially to Robert for this really brilliant, stimulating presentation. Thank you so much. Stay in touch.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.